Imagine walls that have stood for centuries, not just holding secrets, but shaping entire societies. Walls built not merely of stone, but of fear, power, and the evolving idea of justice itself. For most of human history, a prison as we know it didn't exist. There was detention before trial or a quick, brutal end. But then, something changed. Societies grew, empires rose, and with them, the terrifying need for systematic confinement. What if I told you that within the crumbling stones of the world's oldest prisons lie untold stories of forgotten lives, revolutionary ideas, and the very evolution of justice? Prepare to uncover the profound impact these ancient institutions had on everyone, from the most hardened criminal to the powerful figures who built them. Forget everything you think you know about prisons. This is a journey to the hidden histories, the dark heart of the world's most enduring and impactful correctional facilities. Chapter 1. A Journey Through Time, the World's First Prisons. Our journey begins not with reform, but with control. The ancient roots of incarceration were initially rudimentary, holding facilities for slaves, prisoners of war, or those awaiting judgment. In Mesopotamia and Egypt, early examples hinted at a shift in societal control, a movement beyond simple detention to systematic imprisonment, primarily for the purposes of securing people until they could be executed, enslaved, or forced to pay a debt. But to find one of the oldest known state prisons, we must descend into the bedrock of ancient Rome, the Mamertine prison, or Carcer Tullianum. Established perhaps as early as the 7th century BC, beneath the Roman Forum, the Mamertine was no complex of cells. It was a chilling subterranean dungeon, a dark oubliette consisting of 2 superimposed rooms. The lower chamber, the Tullianum, was a literal open sewer where prisoners were dropped through a hole in the ceiling, left in squalid, contaminated conditions. It wasn't built for long-term punishment, but for high-status political enemies and war captives awaiting a triumphant execution. Imagine the final, desperate hours of figures like Vercingetorix, the Gallic leader, or Jugurtha, the Numidian king, both strangled or starved within this darkness. Christian tradition also holds that the apostles Peter and Paul were imprisoned here. The Mamertine was not a place of rehabilitation. It was the ultimate symbol of Roman state power, a waiting room for death. It shows us that the earliest form of a true state prison was less about locking away the masses and more about eliminating the powerful dissenters. Chapter 2. Evolution of Confinement, Medieval Dungeons to Early Modern Jails. As the Roman Empire faded, confinement fragmented. Medieval Europe saw diverse, often ad hoc detention. The deep, cold dampness of castle dungeons used by feudal lords, or the severe discipline of ecclesiastical prisons controlled by the church. Prisons were places of temporary holding, torture, or debt collection. But in England, a new symbol of power and incarceration was rising: the Tower of London. More than just a prison, the Tower was a fortress, a royal palace, a mint, and an armory. But its role as a state prison, particularly during the turbulent Tudor period, secured its terrifying reputation. It was where the powerful and the threatening were sent to disappear, often after interrogation that involved the rare, but terrifying, use of torture. From Scottish kings and French dukes, to the unfortunate English queens like Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, the Tower housed a spectrum of prisoners. The experiences varied wildly. Some wealthy inmates enjoyed relative comfort, allowed to bring in servants. Others, accused of treason, faced grim conditions and a swift appointment with the executioner's block on Tower Green. The carvings etched into the walls of the Beauchamp Tower remain silent testaments to the despair and faith of those detained. The Tower of London perfected the concept of the state prison as a mechanism for political terror and control. Then came a radical shift. In 16th century London, a magnificent former royal residence of Henry VIII was transformed. In 1556, Bridewell Palace was converted into a new kind of institution, the House of Correction. This was the true birth of an entirely new concept, a place that went beyond simple detention or punishment. Bridewell shifted the focus to forced labor and reformation, specifically targeting the idle poor, vagrants, and disorderly women. It was a factory of punitive labor, designed to correct moral failings through work. The name Bridewell became synonymous with this type of facility, later used for jails across the English-speaking world. The transition from the political terror of the Tower to the forced labor of Bridewell marked society's first attempt to engineer better citizens through institutional confinement. Chapter 3: The Dawn of Penitence, Rise of the Penitentiary System. By the 18th century, the old city jails of Europe were at their worst. In London, Newgate Prison became the infamous symbol of this horror. Overcrowded, filthy, and rife with disease like the deadly jail distemper, typhus, Newgate was a terrifying labyrinth. The system was brutally commercial. Private keepers charged inmates for everything, from their cell space to their chains. The wealthy paid for relative comfort. The poor were crammed into the common side, living in abject squalor. Newgate was most notorious as the holding place for those awaiting execution. In 1783, the public gallows were moved right outside its walls, turning hangings into massive, gruesome public spectacles, watched by thousands. Newgate represented the era of retributive punishment, where the spectacle of suffering was the deterrent. But across the Atlantic, a radical, almost utopian experiment began. In 1829, Philadelphia opened the Eastern State Penitentiary. Driven by Quaker ideals, Eastern State was the world's first true penitentiary, a place built not for punishment, but for penitence, for the inmate to reflect on their crimes and spiritually redeem themselves. Architect John Haviland designed it with a radical hub-and-spoke plan and an even more radical policy: solitary confinement. Prisoners were kept rigorously alone, denied all contact. Their food was passed through a small slot. They exercised alone in small yards, and when moved, they were hooded to prevent even a glimpse of another inmate. Each cell had a small skylight, the eye of God, intended to bring them into communion with the divine. Eastern State was a global sensation, influencing the design of over 300 prisons worldwide. However, the psychological toll was immense. Solitary confinement, the very heart of the reformist ideal, proved to be a cruel and dehumanizing punishment, and the system was officially abandoned by 1913. Meanwhile, the British Empire implemented its own form of radical confinement: the penal colony. Port Arthur in Tasmania, established in 1830, was the destination for secondary offenders, those who had reoffended after being transported to Australia. It was a vast industrial prison, forcing convicts into hard labor, timber getting, shipbuilding, quarrying. But Port Arthur also adopted the psychological theories of the time, building its own separate prison in the 1850s, a kind of miniature Eastern State. Here, the silent system reigned. Prisoners were hooded and isolated, subjected to mental subjugation over physical flogging. This shift from corporal to psychological punishment, however, had a tragic, unintended consequence. Many inmates succumbed to mental illness, necessitating the building of an adjacent asylum. Port Arthur reveals the harsh realities of forced labor and the early failures of psychological-based confinement on an imperial scale. Chapter 4: Beyond the Bars, Untold Stories and Forgotten Lives. To understand these fortresses, we must look beyond the architecture and the policies and listen to the silent narratives of the forgotten lives. Letters smuggled out of Newgate speak of unbearable hunger and the constant threat of disease. The meticulous carvings left by prisoners in the Tower of London, or the graffiti left by inmates in Eastern State, reveal a desperate need to leave a mark, a trace of their existence. These are the personal accounts of struggle and hope that give voice to the nameless. The story of these prisons is also shaped by the unsung heroes and villains. We think of the notorious criminals, but what about the prison guards who upheld brutal systems for a pittance? Or the early reformers who lobbied tirelessly for the very prisons that ultimately failed their ideals? These institutions created a profound ripple effect. Transportation to Port Arthur severed families forever. The notoriety of Newgate or the fear surrounding the tower affected the fabric of their surrounding communities for centuries. The walls held the condemned, but their influence stretched across generations. Chapter 5: Legacy and Reflection. What ancient prisons teach us today. Today, many of these ancient structures stand as architectural ghost stories. They are museums, sites of dark tourism, and powerful silent narratives etched in stone. But they are far more than historical curiosities. They are living lessons. The squalor of Newgate taught us that inhumanity breeds only chaos and disease. The failures of Eastern State and Port Arthur's separate prison demonstrated the catastrophic psychological cost of isolation, a lesson that still informs modern debates around solitary confinement and mental health in correctional facilities. They force us to ask a timeless, uncomfortable question. What is the true purpose of incarceration? Retribution? Rehabilitation? Isolation? Or simply control? The world's oldest prisons show us that humanity has struggled with this question for thousands of years, constantly building, tearing down, and rebuilding our institutions of confinement. In the quiet darkness of these ancient walls, the evolution of justice is laid bare, reminding us that every fortress of confinement is ultimately a reflection of the society that built it, and that the human element, the enduring spirit, the suffering, and the quest for redemption, persists even in the most formidable of prisons. The true history of the world's oldest prisons is not just about who was locked up, but about what they tell us about ourselves. What will our prisons say about us centuries from now? If you were intrigued by the hidden histories of the world's oldest prisons, like and subscribe for more chapters from the history mysteries. Which ancient fortress do you want us to explore next? Let us know in the comments below.